A cold hiss echoed as the soda can burst open, its contents splashing across Danielle's chest, soaking her worn gray cardigan and laptop. Laughter erupted while her chair was suddenly kicked from behind, nearly sending her to the floor. As she stood trembling under the fluorescent lights, sticky and humiliated, a dozen phones recorded, but not a single hand reached out to help her. Danielle Harris sat quietly at her desk on the 17th floor of Sterling and Pierce Advertising, just a few blocks from Centennial Olympic Park in downtown Atlanta. The buzz of open-plan chatter, the rapid-fire clicks of expensive heels on polished concrete, and the fake laughter of designer-clad employees echoed around her like a language she was never meant to understand. She wore her usual faded gray cardigan, the elbows thinning, draped over a pale blue blouse she'd bought second-hand years ago. Her slacks, carefully ironed but clearly old, stopped just above a pair of black flats whose soles had long since molded to her feet. Her desk was the neatest in the room, organized, practical, and absent of vanity, but it sat near the corner, right by the air vent that blew too cold in winter and too hot in summer, a quiet exile in a world where visibility equaled value. At 42, Danielle had mastered the art of invisibility. She came in early, left late, spoke only when addressed, and always delivered her work with meticulous precision. But it never seemed to be enough. Not in this place. Not when she refused to wear Gucci belts or post selfies with overpriced lattes on LinkedIn. Not when she didn't play the politics. Harper Blake, the senior strategist, with her razor-cut bob and $1,200 heels, had made it clear from day one that Danielle didn't belong. Harper didn't need words, just a glance, a smirk, a sideways comment in meetings like, "Let's make sure this report doesn't look like it was typed on a flip phone." Brent Ellis, the sales associate with slick-back hair and a permanent grin that never touched his eyes, often joked loudly about the librarian in the back corner whenever Danielle walked past. But the one who made it all worse was Mia Chen, Sterling and Pierce's resident social media queen, who treated the office like her personal runway and whose phone never left her hand. Mia didn't just ignore Danielle, she filmed her, mocked her under her breath, and once even posted a blurry shot of Danielle eating a homemade sandwich with the caption, "Some people still pack tuna?" In 2025? The post got 76 likes and 3 laughing face emojis from people sitting 5 desks away. Danielle saw it. She saw all of it. But she stayed quiet. Until the day everything snapped. That Thursday afternoon, the air in the office buzzed with fake urgency. Harper strutted through the room holding a can of Diet Coke, Brent was laughing too loudly at something inappropriate, and Mia was pacing, filming her day-in-the-life video for TikTok. Danielle was finishing a quarterly analytics report, eyes focused on the screen, fingers flying across the keyboard. She didn't notice Harper approaching until the can slammed onto her desk. "Oops," Harper said sweetly, her eyes gleaming with malice. She flicked the tab. The can hissed and burst. Cold soda sprayed across Danielle's chest and keyboard, soaking her cardigan and papers. The sticky liquid seeped into every page she had worked on for the past 4 hours. A few gasps echoed. No one moved. Brent snorted. "Now that's what I call a brand refresh." Danielle sat frozen, her blouse clinging to her skin, the sugary scent of cola wrapping around her like a shroud. Mia was already recording. "Gold," she whispered, zooming in as if filming a wildlife documentary. "Gotta post this with something witty, maybe, data analyst meets data splash?" Before Danielle could speak, Brent kicked the leg of her chair hard. It lurched sideways. She caught herself just in time, her left hand gripping the edge of the desk as her right tried to save the drenched laptop. Behind her, laughter erupted. Harper feigned concern. "You okay, Danielle? Maybe next time don't zone out so hard." Thomas Grayson, their team leader, stood in his glass-walled office just 20 feet away. He saw it all. He always saw it. And, as usual, he did nothing. Danielle rose slowly, her wet cardigan hanging like a curtain of defeat. She began to gather the ruined reports. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the rage she was swallowing like broken glass. As she stacked the papers, a new sheet appeared in front of her. A yellow sticky note. Look presentable. Thomas must have written it. She recognized his handwriting, the sharp slant, the precise curves. There was no signature. None needed. Harper laughed. Honestly, that sweater looks like it survived the Great Depression. Someone should start a GoFundMe. Danielle clenched the paper in her hand. She didn't cry. Not then. Not in front of them. But the soda stuck to her skin. Her pride dripped to the floor with it. She walked slowly toward the break room, pushing the door closed behind her. Inside, the humming of the fridge was the only sound. She stood still, breathing heavily, then leaned over the sink, gripping its edge. Her reflection in the tiny mirror above showed a woman who had spent years thinking that silence was strength. That if she just worked hard, stayed humble, people would come around. But they hadn't. They saw her decency as weakness, her simplicity as failure, and her presence as a threat. Danielle wiped her face, pulled out her phone with shaking hands, and scrolled through her contacts. She paused over one name, Preston Harris. Her husband. Her protector. Her peace. Preston never interfered. Not because he didn't care, but because Danielle had asked him not to. She didn't want her accomplishments tied to his name, his wealth, his empire. She wanted to stand on her own. But standing alone had cost her too much. Her dignity. Her peace. Her worth. She hit call. The line rang once. Twice. Then, Danielle? His voice. Calm. Warm. The sound of home. She closed her eyes, biting her lip to stop the tears. I need you, she whispered. They went too far. Preston didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Where are you? 6th floor. Break room. Don't move. I'm on my way. The call ended. Danielle stared at the phone in her hand. Her fingers still trembled, but her heart began to still. The storm she had tried to weather alone was now someone else's to carry. For the first time in months, she let herself feel something other than restraint. Not anger. Not pain. Just the slow-burning certainty that change was finally coming. She straightened her cardigan, wiped the corners of her eyes, and stepped back into the hallway, the murmurs of gossip already rising around her like smoke. But she no longer cared. The people who had laughed wouldn't be laughing for long. The elevator at the far end of the corridor dinged. She heard it. And smiled. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that somehow echoed louder than it should have in the tension-laced air of Sterling and Pierce's 6th floor. Danielle Harris stood at the end of the hallway, her cardigan still stained, her shoulders straightened as if she were bracing for a storm, and the storm had just arrived. Every head in the office turned toward the sound. The typing stopped. The laughter died. The whispers froze. And then he stepped out. Preston Harris. He wasn't announced. He didn't need to be. The man in the perfectly tailored charcoal suit moved with the unshakable calm of someone used to owning the space he walked into. Polished shoes clicked once, twice, then carried him forward across the marble tiles like a silent reckoning. His expression was unreadable with calm, but cold. His jaw set, eyes sharp, movements controlled, as though he was holding back a wave of fury behind every breath. No one knew who he was yet. But they felt it. They felt him. He didn't glance at the glass-walled offices. Didn't pause for directions. He walked straight past the stunned interns, the designer heels, the faux confidence, until he reached Danielle. Her eyes met his, and for a brief second, the weight she had carried for so long lifted slightly. Preston stopped beside her and extended his hand, palm open, steady. You ready to go? He asked, voice low but carrying. Danielle nodded, a soft movement of the head. Just give me a moment. And that was when the shift happened. The collective confusion in the room began to morph into something else. Realization. It happened slowly. Eyes darted between Preston and Danielle, between his commanding presence and her quiet strength. And then the pieces started clicking together. Harper Blake, standing near the coffee machine in a tight beige dress, turned pale. Brent Ellis, halfway through a smirk, froze mid-expression. Mia Chen's phone lowered an inch in her hand. Thomas Grayson stood in his office doorway, arms crossed like. He had everything under control until Preston turned his gaze toward him. Then, one by one, he spoke. Calm. Crisp. Ruthless. Harper Blake, Preston said, turning to the strategist. You threw a can of soda on a woman at her workstation in front of 15 witnesses. Harper blinked, her hands trembling as she tried to look confused. I didn't mean to. It was just, Preston cut her off with a slight tilt of the head. Intent is irrelevant. You humiliated my wife. A gasp rolled through the room. Wife. That word landed like a hammer. Preston continued. Brent Ellis. You physically assaulted her by kicking her chair and inciting public ridicule. That's workplace harassment and potentially battery. Brent opened his mouth, face flushed red, but nothing came out. Preston moved on. Mia Chen. You filmed her distress without consent. Then you posted it online. That's not just a violation of basic human decency, it's a liability. Mia stammered, it was just content. It wasn't even that serious. You're right, Preston replied coolly. It was worse. He finally turned to Thomas Grayson. And you. As team leader, you not only allowed this culture of cruelty to flourish, you actively enabled it through silence. You watched, you did nothing, and that makes you just as guilty. Thomas tried to speak, but Preston raised a single finger, silencing him before a word left his lips. Sterling and Pierce is owned by Harris Global Ventures, Preston said, now addressing the entire room. Which means I own this company. And as of this moment, Harper Blake, Brent Ellis, Mia Chen, and Thomas Grayson, you are all officially terminated. Pack your things. Security is on the way. The room was dead silent. Only the software of the HVAC could be heard above the pounding of panicked hearts. You can't just fire us, Harper sputtered. There's protocol, HR, this is illegal. Preston's gaze narrowed. HR has already been informed. Your exit paperwork will be handled by our legal department. And as for illegal, you should consult a lawyer about your own actions before making that claim. Brent's voice cracked. This is over a cardigan-wearing data girl? She's nothing. She doesn't belong here. Preston stepped closer to him, the temperature in the room dropping. That data girl happens to be more intelligent, more loyal, and more dignified than every one of you combined. And she's not nothing. She's my wife. Mia dropped her phone. It hit the tile floor with a loud crack. Preston didn't even flinch. He turned back to the room. Let this be a reminder. Titles don't make people valuable. Clothes don't make them competent. And cruelty is not a leadership trait, it's a disease. One that ends here. Danielle stood beside him, silent, powerful. She didn't speak. She didn't gloat. She simply existed in her truth, and that was louder than anything she could have said. Security arrived moments later. The lead guard, a woman in a dark blazer, approached calmly. Mr. Harris, she said with a nod, we're ready. Preston gestured toward the 4 stunned employees. Escort them out. Collect their badges. They are not to return. The guards did as instructed, giving the disgraced ex-employees just enough time to grab their essentials. Harper muttered something under her breath. Brent tried to make a call. Mia sobbed quietly. Thomas walked like a man who had already lost everything. Preston turned back to Danielle. Let's go home. She gave a small nod and reached for her bag. But as they turned to leave, a sudden voice rang out. You're only here because of him. Harper's final, desperate scream echoed across the room. Without him, you'd be nothing. Danielle paused, slowly turned. And then, for the first time all day, she spoke. Her voice was soft, steady, and unshakable. I was something long before you noticed me. You just didn't have the eyes to see it. Harper's face crumpled. Danielle turned back around. She didn't need to say anything else. Preston led her out, his hand gently resting on the small of her back. The elevator waited with open doors. As they stepped in together, the silence behind them was louder than any applause could ever be. The doors closed, and everything changed. The elevator doors slid shut behind Danielle and Preston Harris, sealing off the chaos they had just left behind on the 6th floor of Sterling and Pierce. The silence inside the lift felt heavier than the noise outside. Danielle stood quietly, her eyes focused forward, her hands no longer trembling. Preston stood beside her, tall and composed, but with a subtle tension in his jaw, as if part of him was still prepared to walk back out and burn the entire company to the ground. But Danielle didn't need fire. She had walked out in silence, and that silence spoke louder than any rage. When they reached the ground floor, they exited side by side, past the sleek security desk and the wide-eyed receptionist who had only ever known Danielle as the quiet lady in the back. No one stopped them. No one dared. That day marked the last time Danielle Harris would ever set foot in that building. She didn't announce her departure. She didn't write a resignation letter. She simply never returned. There were no emails, no closure, no attempt to salvage a place that had never seen her worth. And she didn't need it. Because what came next was the beginning of a life where she no longer had to shrink herself to fit someone else's mold. The first few weeks were quiet, almost too quiet. Danielle spent her mornings in the small sunroom of their midtown apartment, sipping coffee while sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. She began sorting through old notebooks filled with ideas she had written down over the years, improvements to data systems, better ways to streamline marketing analytics, ways to make tech more accessible to underserved communities. She'd always thought those ideas would be ignored. But now, they became her blueprint. With Preston's encouragement, but never interference, she built her own consulting practice, Harris Insight Solutions, though she quietly dropped the last name from the branding. She offered analytics and strategy support for nonprofits, community startups, and small businesses that couldn't afford flashy agencies but needed real results. She worked from her laptop at the kitchen table, sometimes still wearing that same gray cardigan, now cleaned and stitched, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to remind herself of how far she'd come. Her first client was a grassroots literacy nonprofit struggling to track impact across local schools. Her work helped them double their grant approvals. Then came a local bakery chain trying to expand but unsure how to interpret sales data. Danielle gave them the roadmap that turned their 3 stores into 10. One by one, word of mouth grew. Not because she shouted, but because she delivered. Meanwhile, the world Danielle had left behind began to crumble. The news of the firings at Sterling and Pierce spread across industry circles like wildfire. Harper Blake's name quickly became synonymous with hostile workplace behavior. No reputable agency would touch her. She attempted to pivot into freelance consulting but was quietly blacklisted from major contracts. In less than a year, she moved out of her luxury condo and offloaded her car. She still posted occasionally on LinkedIn, carefully curated posts full of vague optimism, but no one responded. Brent Ellis didn't fare much better. The market didn't forget his cruel jokes or his record of disrespect. Recruiters ghosted him. His savings dwindled. Rumor had it he took a job cold calling for a second-tier insurance firm, working from a shared office space he used to mock. Mia Chen's fall was the loudest. Her influencer lifestyle vanished overnight when screenshots of her video mocking Danielle resurfaced. Brands canceled deals. Sponsors disappeared. Followers turned on her. Her content went from glam and curated to apologetic and desperate, until even the apologies stopped. Eventually, her account went dark. And Thomas Grayson? He vanished. The man who once strutted around the office with pride and smug detachment now lived in silence. A brief mention in an industry newsletter noted his voluntary resignation and his desire to pursue personal projects. But no one knew what that meant. Danielle never spoke of any of them. When journalists tried to reach out for a story of corporate redemption, she politely declined. When podcasts requested interviews, she responded with a simple, "I'm focused on my clients." She never celebrated their downfall. She didn't have to. Their choices had buried them. Hers had freed her. Some evenings, after a full day of remote meetings and data reports, Danielle would sit on the small balcony of her apartment, wrapped in a soft blanket, sipping chamomile tea. The skyline of Atlanta shimmered in the distance, a constant reminder of how far she had climbed without ever having to wear someone else's armor. Preston would join her, sometimes with a glass of whiskey, sometimes with nothing but his quiet presence. He never said, "I told you so." He didn't need to. He had always known who she was, even when the world refused to see it. One night, as they watched the lights of the city twinkle like 1,000 tiny stories waiting to be told, Danielle finally spoke. "I didn't survive that place," she said softly. "I outgrew it." Preston turned to her, a smile in his eyes. "You didn't just outgrow it," he replied. "You proved you never needed it." Danielle nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back toward the horizon. "They thought the silence meant weakness," she murmured. But it was just the calm before the clarity. She didn't need the noise. She didn't need the stage. Her life was no longer about proving anything. It was about peace. About purpose. About using her mind, her experience, and her compassion to lift others up instead of tearing herself down. And that, more than anything, was her true legacy. She didn't become a household name. She didn't build a billion-dollar brand. But in quiet ways that few would ever notice, Danielle Harris transformed lives. Not with spectacle, but with substance. In a world obsessed with loudness, her gentleness became her superpower. She had been overlooked, underestimated, even mocked, but she never let it define her. And when the world finally saw her for who she truly was, it wasn't because she demanded their attention. It was because she had earned their respect. Danielle leaned back in her chair and let the wind carry away the last remnants of bitterness. Somewhere, down below, someone else was walking through a glass door for the first time, unsure if they belonged. Danielle hoped that maybe, just maybe, her story would be the reason they chose not to shrink. And that was enough. That was more than enough. There's something quietly powerful about a person who refuses to break, even when the world around them tries to crush their spirit. Danielle Harris's story isn't just about justice. It's about dignity. About holding onto your self-worth when everything around you says you don't belong. It's about walking through fire and coming out not only whole, but stronger than before. In life, you may find yourself in rooms where you're overlooked because you don't wear the right clothes, speak the right way, or come from the right background. You may be judged by shallow standards, mocked for your simplicity, or ignored for your quiet strength. But let Danielle's story be a reminder: your value is not determined by your appearance, your silence does not equal weakness, and your worth does not need anyone's permission to exist. What Danielle taught us is that power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands in silence. Sometimes it walks away from what no longer serves it. And sometimes it simply chooses to rise above, without seeking revenge or validation. Her story is for every person who has ever swallowed their pride to keep the peace, for every soul who chose to endure instead of explode, and for anyone who has ever been told they are less than because they don't fit someone else's mold. So here's my advice to you: stay rooted in who you are. The world will try to box you in, mold you, or make you feel like you need to change to be seen. Don't let it. Be kind, but don't be silent when it's time to speak. Be humble, but never shrink yourself. And when you're wronged, don't let bitterness take root. Let justice speak for you, even if it arrives in quiet, unshakable steps. Because in the end, like Danielle, your legacy will not be built on noise or applause. It will be built on character. And that's something no one can strip away. Thank you for listening to this story today on U.S. Daily Story. If Danielle's journey moved you, please share this video with someone who might need the reminder that strength comes in many forms. Leave a comment below, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if stories of resilience, justice, and quiet power speak to your heart, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Until next time, stand tall, speak truth, and walk in your worth.